Ever wonder why the production code regulated morality on screen, but said nothing about safety behind it? Or why studio contracts once included clauses forbidding actors from discussing their injuries? Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain on Hollywood's most dangerous era, when the line between movie magic and mortal danger was as thin as celluloid itself. What if every glittering frame of Hollywood's golden age hit a brush with death? Buckle up, because the answer is a lot more than the moguls ever admitted. The Tin Man Who Couldn't Breathe. The first thing Buddy Ebsen noticed was the taste. Sharp, metallic, invading his mouth with each breath on the Technicolor set of The Wizard of Oz. MGM's makeup department, determined to create the perfect silvery sheen for the Tin Man, had concocted a paste of pure aluminum dust mixed with clown-white grease paint. Each morning, they covered every inch of Ebsen's exposed skin and sealed it with a fixative that essentially trapped the toxic metal against his pores. By the 10th day of shooting, Ebsen began coughing uncontrollably in his hotel room. His breath came in short, painful gasps. His lungs felt as if they were filling with concrete. When he collapsed that night, doctors rushed him to the hospital, where they discovered both lungs severely inflamed from aluminum poisoning. For 2 harrowing weeks, Ebsen lay inside an iron lung respirator, fighting for every breath while the studio scrambled to replace him with Jack Haley. Production never stopped, couldn't stop, not with Louis B. Mayer's millions already invested. While Ebsen lay fighting for his life, MGM quietly modified the makeup formula for Haley, adding a layer of protective cream beneath the aluminum. When Ebsen finally recovered enough to leave his hospital bed, studio executives presented him with new contract pages. The fine print was clear. If he wanted to keep working in Hollywood, he would never mention what had happened. The actor's blue eyes, once so expressive, were now permanently shadowed. The poisoning left him with a distinctive rasp that would follow him through his entire career, a ghostly echo of the character he never got to play, the witch who went up in flames. Timing error, the MGM incident report blandly stated. Margaret Hamilton, the former kindergarten teacher who played the Wicked Witch of the West, had a more precise description. Agony. The scene called for her character to disappear in a puff of smoke and flashing fire. The special effects team had rigged a trapdoor with an elevator mechanism designed to lower Hamilton beneath the stage, the instant before red-tinted smoke and a controlled flame burst upward. In rehearsal, everything worked flawlessly. When cameras rolled for the second take, Hamilton delivered her lines with perfect menace. The cue came, and she struck the mark. But the elevator jammed. For 3 horrifying seconds, sheets of flame roared around her before she could clear the trapdoor. The copper-based green makeup covering her face ignited almost instantly. Her pointed hat caught fire, and the broom she carried became a torch in her hand. Crew members doused the flames, but the damage was done. Her green-painted chin was scorched black. The skin of her right hand had been burned to the bone. The pain was so intense that Hamilton later recalled she couldn't even scream. Her lungs simply seized. 6 excruciating weeks and several painful skin grafts later, Hamilton shocked everyone by returning to the set. The studio expected her to simply pick up where she left off, but the actress had one non-negotiable condition. No more pyrotechnics while I'm on the stage. She would complete the film, but not at the cost of her life. The terror in her eyes during subsequent scenes required no acting. The Broomstick Bomb. "You couldn't pay me enough to get back on that contraption," Betty Danko told the studio nurse, while bandages were wrapped around her leg. As Margaret Hamilton's stunt double, Danko had already performed several dangerous scenes for The Wizard of Oz, but none as catastrophic as the broomstick flight. For the sequence where the witch flies over the Emerald City, writing "Surrender Dorothy" in smoke, effects technicians constructed what was essentially a bicycle seat mounted atop a steel pipe. Hidden inside the pipe was a smoke pot filled with sulfur powder meant to create dramatic puffs on cue. What the crew didn't account for was how violently the powder would ignite when confined in such a narrow space. Danko dangled 40 feet in the air on thin wires, perched on the makeshift saddle. When the camera rolled and the effects man triggered the smoke pot, the pipe effectively became a bomb. The explosion ripped through the metal, tearing into Danko's leg and sending her spinning uncontrollably through the air. Only the safety net below prevented a fatal fall. 11 agonizing days in Cedars of Lebanon Hospital followed as doctors struggled to repair the damage. The studio sent flowers, but no workers' compensation forms. Those would require official acknowledgement of the accident. When Danko finally returned home, she brought a twisted piece of metal with her, the exploded broom pipe, which she kept as a paperweight on her desk for the rest of her life. Insurance, for when they try to say it never happened, she explained to curious visitors. Her film career ended that day, above the Emerald City, but her injuries ensured she would never fly again, on camera or off. 40 miles an hour and 18 stitches. Joe Couldnt had stunt work in his blood. As the son of legendary horseman Yakima Couldnt, he knew the fine line between spectacular visuals and catastrophe. For William Wyler's epic Ben-Hur, the younger Couldnt was tasked with doubling for Charlton Heston during the film's centerpiece, the Chariot Race. The sequence called for Ben-Hur's chariot to hit a disabled vehicle, and for Ben-Hur to be thrown forward over the front rail, then somehow pull himself back into the speeding chariot. In rehearsal, Couldnt practiced by tightening his safety belt and deliberately letting go of the reins at precisely the right moment. When cameras rolled for real, 4 matched white Arabian horses pulled the chariot at speeds approaching 40 miles per hour. The collision came. Couldnt pitched forward as planned. But no one anticipated how violently the chariot would bounce over the wreckage. The safety belt snapped. Couldnt flew headfirst over the rail, skidded perilously close to the thundering hooves, then somehow, in a feat of pure athletic instinct, clawed his way back aboard without missing a beat. Director William Wyler, watching through his viewfinder, kept the cameras rolling. Only when cut was finally called did crew members realize what had happened. Blood streamed down Count's chin, where he had struck the rail. A medic later counted 18 stitches needed to close the wound, and Wyler had captured an immortal shot. When the film premiered, audiences gasped at the sequence. Few knew they were watching an actual near-death experience unfold in real time, or that the actor they believed to be Heston had come within inches of being trampled under wooden wheels and pounding hooves. Dragging for glory. 16 years before his son's chariot mishap, Yakima Couldnt himself had set the standard for death-defying stunts. For John Ford's 1939 Western Stagecoach, Couldnt planned a sequence where an Indian warrior would leap from his horse onto the team pulling a stagecoach, then fall between the horses and under the coach itself. The veteran stuntman rehearsed the timing over and over, calculating precisely how to let 6 galloping horses stomp over him without crushing his skull. The trick depended on lying perfectly flat in a prepared rut, while the coach's axle passed safely overhead. When cameras rolled, Couldnt made the leap flawlessly, grabbing the harness of the lead horse. But as he slid down, his hand slipped. Instead of a controlled fall, he tumbled directly under the pounding hooves. The team dragged him along the dirt as crew members watched in horror, certain they were filming a man's last moments. The stagecoach wheels missed Count's head by a mere 3 inches as he lay helpless in the dirt. After the rig passed, crew members sprinted toward what they expected to be a broken body. Instead, they found Couldnt standing up, brushing dust from his clothes. A savage rope burned the only evidence of what had happened. "Got a little closer than I meant to," was all he said, inspecting his torn shirt. John Ford kept the footage in the final cut of the film. That single take, born of miscalculation and saved by inches, would become the template for under-the-coach stunts for decades to come, though few would risk the full gag as Couldnt had done. The Western stunt rulebook had been forever changed by a mistake that should have killed its innovator. The Daybuster broke his neck. Swell gag, Buster Keaton wrote in his notebook for the 1924 film Sherlock Jr. The setup was simple. His character would pull a water tower's release lever, expecting a small splash, only to be knocked flat by a torrent. What appeared effortless on screen required precise timing and, in Keaton's case, willingness to take physical punishment for a laugh. The water for the gag wasn't a special effect. It was several tons of actual water held back by pressure valves until the camera rolled. When the torrent was released, it slammed into Keaton with far more force than expected, driving him down onto the solid railroad ties beneath. Even for a performer known for physical resilience, the impact was shocking. Crew members saw him briefly stunned, rubbing the back of his neck. After a moment, in typical Keaton fashion, he laughed it off and insisted on continuing the day's shooting. For years afterward, Keaton occasionally mentioned headaches and stiffness in his neck, but attributed them to general wear and tear from his demanding stunts. It wasn't until nearly a decade later, during an X-ray for an unrelated injury, that a doctor made a startling discovery. "Have you ever broken your neck?" the physician asked, pointing to the film. Keaton looked at the healed fracture of his top cervical vertebra with genuine surprise. "I don't think so," he replied. After comparing dates, Keaton realized the water tower deluge had actually broken his neck, a potentially fatal or paralyzing injury that he had simply walked off and never had treated. The doctor called it miraculous that the fracture had healed at all, let alone without complications. Keaton's only response was practical. "Well, that explains those headaches." The Great Stoneface had lived up to his nickname in the most literal way possible, enduring what should have been a catastrophic injury without missing a single day's filming. Live ammo in Taxi. The early days of talking pictures were a wild west of filmmaking techniques, with directors pushing boundaries to create realism at any cost. For the 1932 gangster film Taxi, Warner Brothers wanted authentic gunshot sounds, not the blank cartridges that were becoming industry standard. Their solution was as simple as it was insane. Load caliber revolvers with live ammunition and fire them directly past leading man James Cagney's head. The plan called for real bullets to whiz just past his left ear before embedding themselves in a wall behind him. On the first take, Cagney felt something sting his cheek, a chip of plaster wall that had been dislodged by a bullet passing too close. A thin line of blood trickled down his face. The actor, known for his fiery temperament off-screen as well as on, didn't just become angry. He became coldly strategic. Production halted immediately as Cagney walked off the set, making straight for the nascent Screen Actors Guild, where he joined fellow actors at a meeting that very night. The incident became a rallying point. If stars of Cagney's caliber could be put at risk for a sound effect, what protections did any performer have? The next morning, Cagney returned with a non-negotiable demand. He would never again perform in a scene with live ammunition, and neither would any actor who valued their life. The union soon wrote that promise into every studio contract, establishing one of the first concrete safety regulations in an industry that had previously treated casualties as an acceptable price for entertainment. The scar on Cagney's cheek remained visible in close-ups for years afterward, a small but permanent reminder of how close Hollywood had come to losing one of its brightest stars over a sound effect that could have been added in post-production. The millionaire who proved himself wrong. Howard Hughes never asked his people to take risks. He wouldn't take himself. The problem was, Hughes would take almost any risk. For his World War I aviation epic Hell's Angels, the Millionaire producer demanded a spectacular sequence where a biplane would dive through clouds at a near vertical angle before pulling up at the last possible second. 2 professional pilots reviewed the stunt and refused, calling it aerodynamically impossible, given the aircraft's limitations. Hughes fired them both and announced he would fly the sequence himself. Despite having only amateur flying experience, Hughes climbed into the cockpit of the experimental craft. At 2,500 feet, He pushed the plane into the required dive, gathering speed as cameramen tracked from the ground. But when he tried to pull out, the controls failed to respond fully. The aircraft stalled, and Hughes crashed violently into a beet field. Crewmen pulled him from the wreckage unconscious, his skull fractured in 2 places, his cheekbones shattered. Doctors initially gave him slim chances of survival. After emergency surgery, 2 steel plates were installed in his head, and multiple skin grafts were needed to reconstruct his face. 3 months later, still learning to speak clearly again, Hughes wheeled himself into the editing room to review the footage captured just before his crash. His verdict was clinical. Usable, but not worth it. The sequence made it into the final film, but Hughes would carry the physical evidence of his miscalculation for life: occasional slurred speech, intermittent pain, and a face subtly different from the one he had before. The irony wasn't lost on Hughes. He had proven both that the stunt could be filmed and that his fired pilots had been right about its dangers all along. The crash marked the beginning of his lifelong addiction to painkillers, a dependency that would contribute to his later mental decline. A heart attack atop Sinai. Cecil B. DeMille was 75 years old and in the midst of directing his biblical epic, The 10 Commandments, when he climbed a 130-foot camera tower to personally oversee a crucial scene. The day was blisteringly hot, even by Egyptian desert standards. Below, thousands of extras waited while technicians struggled with a jammed camera mechanism high above. DeMille, impatient with delays and unwilling to delegate the critical shot, hauled his aging body up the rickety ladder to the platform. After several minutes of work with the camera operators, he managed to clear the jam. Standing at the tower's edge, he raised his megaphone and yelled, "Action!" to the masses below, then clutched his chest and collapsed. Crew members scrambled up the tower as the scene played out beneath them, unaware of the drama overhead. Medics diagnosed a massive heart attack and urged immediate hospitalization. DeMille refused until the day's filming was complete. "If I'm dying anyway, I might as well die getting the shot," he reportedly told his assistant director. After finally agreeing to medical transport, doctors expected him to remain hospitalized for weeks. Instead, DeMille checked himself out 48 hours later, returning to the set on a stretcher from which he continued directing. His instructions to the crew became legend. "If I die, bury me behind the Sphinx, but get the shot first." For the remainder of production, DeMille directed while lying flat, occasionally standing for brief periods when absolutely necessary to demonstrate a camera move. His dedication bordered on mania, but the results were undeniable. The film would gross $122 million worldwide, astronomical numbers for 1956, and become DeMille's crowning achievement. That it nearly killed him in the process seemed, to the director, entirely appropriate for a film about divine power and human endurance. Dysentery on the African Queen. "Never drink water when whiskey is available," became Humphrey Bogart's mantra during the hellish 1951 shoot for The African Queen in the Belgian Congo. The production used actual location water from the bacteria-infested Rookie River for everything from bathing to cooking. While most of the crew purified their drinking water, the unpredictable supply chains often left them without reliable alternatives. Bogart and director John Huston solved this problem by subsisting almost entirely on imported whiskey, claiming, only half-jokingly, that the alcohol killed any microbes they might ingest. By contrast, Katharine Hepburn, a committed teetotaler, drank tea made from boiled local water and suffered the consequences almost immediately. Within days of arrival, Hepburn began experiencing severe dysentery. Between takes, she would disappear into the jungle undergrowth, emerging pale and shaking. During one key scene aboard the titular boat, she vomited repeatedly out of camera range, then resumed her lines as if nothing had happened. Over 2 nightmarish weeks, she lost 12 pounds from her already slender frame. The crisis peaked when Hepburn collapsed in the boat's boiler room during a particularly hot day. Local medical workers rehydrated her with quinine water, warning that without proper hospital care, she risked potentially fatal complications. They strongly advised her to leave the production. Instead, Hepburn wrapped herself in blankets to mask her now gaunt appearance, recalibrated her performance to conserve energy between takes, and insisted on finishing. When later asked why she hadn't evacuated to safer conditions, her response was both practical and revealing of Hollywood's ethos. The show must go on isn't just a saying, it's how careers survive. In her subsequent memoir, she devoted an entire chapter to the experience, titling it, "The Things We Do for Art," a phrase that captured both pride in her endurance and acknowledgement of the absurdity of risking health for entertainment. A broken jaw in Spartacus. The soup cauldron scene in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus was intended to showcase the brutal reality of slave life in ancient Rome. The script called for Kirk Douglas's character to confront Roman overseer Marcellus, played by Charles McGraw, culminating in a violent altercation. What wasn't in the script was the genuine injury that would permanently alter McGraw's appearance. During rehearsals, Douglas and McGraw carefully choreographed their movements, planning how Douglas would appear to slam McGraw's face into a cauldron of soup without actually making contact. But when cameras rolled on the third take, Douglas, perhaps caught up in the intensity of the scene, miscalculated the distance. Instead of the planned near miss, he drove McGraw's jaw directly into the metal pot with full force. The sickening crack was audible even over the ambient noise of the set. McGraw's mandible had snapped cleanly along the hinge. With remarkable stoicism, or perhaps simple shock, McGraw continued the scene, delivering his remaining lines through what must have been excruciating pain. Blood trickled through his beard and into the soup below, adding an unscripted element of realism. Only after Kubrick called cut did McGraw allow himself to be examined. The verdict was unequivocal: a fully broken jaw requiring immediate medical attention. For the next 6 weeks, McGraw's jaw remained wired shut, and he consumed only liquids through a straw. Yet he never filed a complaint or lawsuit against either Douglas or the production, an omission that seems almost inconceivable by modern standards. The injury remained an open secret within the industry until years later, when extras from the production began sharing stories of that day's filming. Douglas himself, when asked about the incident decades later, expressed regret, but also a kind of admiration for McGraw's professionalism. He took a real punch and kept acting. They don't make them like that anymore. Burning inside Godzilla. The original Godzilla films pioneered special effects that would influence monster movies for generations, but for Haruo Nakajima, the man inside the monster, each day of filming was a battle for survival that audiences never saw. For 1955's Godzilla Raids Again, Nakajima crawled into a 200-pound rubber suit designed with virtually no ventilation. Inside this airtight latex prison, temperatures routinely passed 60 degrees Celsius. Nakajima could only remain in the suit for about 3 minutes before risking heat stroke, meaning each take was literally a race against biological limits. During one key battle sequence, hidden squibs, small explosive charges designed to simulate bullet impacts, detonated prematurely inside the suit. Flames shot up through the hollow latex spine, severely burning Nakajima's left arm. Unable to remove the costume quickly enough to treat the injury, he continued performing as fire smoldered against his skin. The situation worsened when wires hoisting him over a miniature tank set for an aerial shot snapped unexpectedly. The massive suit plunged 6 feet into a water tank below. Nakajima's oxygen supply was cut off as water flooded in through his air hose. Only the quick action of crew members, who winched him out by emergency cables, prevented him from drowning inside the costume. Despite these near-fatal incidents, Nakajima was given less than an hour to recover before being asked to reshoot the scene, using the same damaged suit, with temporary repairs to the burned sections. His objections were dismissed by producers who pointed to the tight shooting schedule and budget constraints. Nakajima would go on to play Godzilla in 12 films over 18 years, suffering numerous injuries that he only fully revealed later in life. When asked why he continued despite the dangers, his answer was simple: someone had to bring the monster to life. The price of that animation was countless scars, respiratory problems, and chronic pain that would follow him long after he hung up the suit for good. The cliff that killed a horse. The 1939 Western Jesse James, starring Tyrone Power, required a spectacular stunt for its climax: a horse and rider plunging off a 70-foot cliff into a river below. Director Henry King insisted on absolute realism, rejecting any suggestion of using camera tricks or a fake horse. Veteran stuntman Cliff Lyons agreed to ride over, but with significant safety preparations. He would strap himself to the saddle, then detach at the last second after the horse had committed to the fall. A hidden air compressor would break the animal's impact with the water. When cameras rolled, Lyons and his mount galloped toward the bluff at full speed. As planned, he triggered the release and separated from the animal just before it reached the edge. The horse, unable to stop its momentum and blindfolded to prevent panic, plunged over the precipice. What wasn't planned was the failure of the air compressor. The horse struck the water at near-terminal velocity, breaking its spine upon impact. As horrified crew members rushed to the river, Lyons surfaced dazed but alive. The horse thrashed briefly in the water, clearly in agony, before drowning. Word of the incident spread quickly through Hollywood and beyond. Outraged animal protection groups demanded answers. An American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals investigation revealed that this wasn't the only animal casualty. Reports claimed as many as 25 horses had died during various stunts throughout the production. The public backlash forced industry change. Within months, the American Humane Association established a formal presence on film sets, creating the now familiar "No Animals Were Harmed" certification process. While this monitoring would take decades to become truly comprehensive, the death of that single horse marked the beginning of accountability for animal welfare in cinema. Perhaps most disturbing of all, the fatal plunge remained in the final cut of the film. Depression-era audiences watching Jesse James in theaters were unknowingly witnessing the actual death of an animal for their entertainment, a practice that would gradually become unthinkable as standards evolved. Errol Flynns' unscripted stab. The swashbuckling adventure films of the 1930s pioneered action choreography that still influences cinema today, but their elaborate sword fights carried very real dangers. During production of the 1938 classic The Adventures of Robin Hood, these risks became bloodily apparent to its star, Errol Flynn. The climactic castle battle between Robin Hood and Sir Guy of Gisborne, Basil Rathbone, featured dozens of extras swinging swords, axes, and spears in carefully orchestrated chaos. Safety protocols required all weapons to have dull edges and protective rubber tips, but in the rush of production, one sword made it to the set without its protective button. During a frenetic sequence, an unnamed extra thrust his rapier in Flynn's direction, expecting the star to parry the blow as rehearsed. When the timing was slightly off, the unprotected sword slid past Flynn's blade and penetrated 6 inches into his ribcage, between the 7th and 8th ribs. True to his reputation for professionalism, and perhaps aided by the adrenaline of the moment, Flynn completed the entire take before anyone realized he had been wounded. Only when director Michael Curtis called cut did Flynn collapse onto a nearby prop table, blood staining his Lincoln green costume. A studio doctor was summoned to Flynn's trailer, where he stitched the wound without anesthetic. The production lost just half a day of filming. When Flynn returned to set, Warner Brothers executives presented him with a contract addendum specifying that all blades used in his future films would be not merely dull, but actually made of rubber, a practice that soon became standard across the industry. Flynn, ever the showman, later embellished the story in his autobiography, claiming he had nearly died. Medical reports suggest a less dramatic, but still serious puncture wound that could indeed have been fatal had it struck a few inches higher. What's certain is that Flynn finished the picture with a new scar and a newfound respect for the dangers lurking behind even the most carefully planned action sequence. Basil Rathbone's trample. While Flynn's injury during the adventures of Robin Hood became the stuff of Hollywood legend, his co-star Basil Rathbone suffered an equally serious wound that has been largely forgotten by film history. During the massive courtyard battle that serves as the film's action centerpiece, Rathbone was required to charge through a crowd of fighting extras while pursuing Flynn's Robin Hood. The choreography called for the extras to part briefly, allowing Rathbone to pass safely through their mock combat. On the day of filming, however, the extras, many of them recruited from local athletic clubs and inexperienced in stage combat, became caught up in the excitement of the scene. As Rathbone made his charge, the human corridor failed to open. The actor found himself suddenly engulfed in a swarm of enthusiastic performers swinging prop weapons with real metal components. In the confusion, someone drove a prop spear downward, catching Rathbone's boot and pinning it to the wooden studio floor. As he struggled to free himself, another extra bumped him from behind, causing him to wrench his foot while it was still impaled. The spear tore through his boot leather and sliced deeply into his instep. Cameras continued rolling as Rathbone, hobbled but determined, freed himself and limped through the remainder of the scene. Only when blood began visibly pooling inside his boot did he signal for assistance. 8 stitches were required to close the wound. Production schedules being what they were, Rathbone returned to the set the following day on crutches to record dialogue while the castle courtyard was reset for additional angles. The actor, renowned for his actual fencing expertise, later remarked with irony that he had survived hundreds of real sword fights only to be injured in a staged one. Director Michael Curtis, notoriously unsympathetic to actor complaints, simply had the script rewritten to accommodate Rathbone's noticeable limp, transforming the injury into a character detail that audiences assumed was an intentional choice rather than painful necessity. Lionel Barrymore's second shatter. Few Golden Age Hollywood careers were as dramatically altered by on-set injury as that of Lionel Barrymore. Already a respected actor with decades of stage and screen experience, Barrymore was filming the 1937 drama Saratoga when disaster struck for the second time in his later years. 2 years earlier, Barrymore had shattered his hip in an off-set car accident, requiring extensive surgery and threatening his ability to walk. Through painful rehabilitation, he had regained enough mobility to return to work, though with a noticeable limp that directors worked around. During a tracking shot on the Saratoga set, a trailing camera cable snagged Barrymore's foot as he walked across the soundstage. The actor fell heavily, landing directly on his previously injured hip. The sound of bone breaking was described by one witness as like a dry branch snapping underfoot. Medical examinations confirmed the worst. Barrymore had re-broken the barely healed hip, this time with complications that would make full recovery impossible. Doctors delivered the grim prognosis that he would likely never stand unaided again, effectively ending his career unless roles could be found for a seated performer. MGM, faced with losing one of its most valuable character actors, made an unprecedented accommodation. Studio head Louis B. Mayer personally ordered that all of Barrymore's future roles be rewritten to incorporate a wheelchair. The script for Saratoga itself was hastily modified to explain his character's sudden immobility. What began as tragic necessity became a defining characteristic. For the next 11 years, the remainder of his career, Barrymore performed exclusively from a wheelchair or, occasionally, from fixed seated positions. When asked about this limitation, Barrymore insisted it was his choice rather than medical necessity, telling reporters, "I found I could act better sitting down. Standing up, I was always worrying about what to do with my hands." This fiction preserved his dignity, while creating an iconic screen presence that modern audiences most recognize from his portrayal of Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, a role specifically conceived for an actor who could not stand. Ray Miland versus a runaway horse. Welsh-born actor Ray Miland was no stranger to horseback riding, having served in the British Household Cavalry before his acting career. That experience may have saved his life during a near-fatal accident on the set of 1939's Hotel Imperial. The script called for Miland's character to make a dramatic entrance on horseback, galloping across a cobblestone courtyard. The scene required multiple takes, and with each pass, the horse, already nervous from the unfamiliar environment and camera equipment, grew increasingly agitated. On the fourth attempt, something startled the animal just as cameras began rolling. The horse bolted beyond the planned route, heading straight for a narrow archway with stone walls on either side. Miland, realizing he couldn't stop the animal in time, tried to duck low to avoid hitting his head on the arch. His timing was slightly off. The horse charged through the opening while Miland's head struck the stone edge with sickening force. Witnesses described seeing the actor thrown backward off the mount, landing motionless on the cobblestones as the horse continued its panic-driven gallop. Miland lay unconscious for over 24 hours, while production halted and studio executives prepared contingency announcements in case of his death. Surgeons closed a 3-inch gash that laid open his scalp to the bone and performed delicate work to repair shattered bones in his right hand, which had been crushed when the horse trampled it during his fall. When he finally regained consciousness, Miland's first question wasn't about his condition, but whether the cameras had captured the accident. Learning they hadn't, he agreed, against medical advice, to reshoot the entrance once his concussion symptoms cleared. 2 weeks later, heavily bandaged but determined, Miland mounted another horse and completed the scene. The experience left him with a permanent ridge of scar tissue along his hairline and occasional migraines. But these after effects didn't prevent him from winning an Academy Award 6 years later for The Lost Weekend. Proof that in Hollywood, survival often equaled opportunity for those tough enough to return to work. Gene Kelly's Feverdream. The most joyful sequence in American musical history hides a story of physical suffering that only adds to its legend. When Gene Kelly splashed through puddles, singing the title song of Singin' in the Rain, his radiant smile masked a raging fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Kelly had spent weeks choreographing the sequence, insisting on performing it during actual rainfall, rather than using the industry-standard technique of filming on a dry day and adding rain in post-production. Massive overhead sprinklers were installed across the entire street set, recycling 10,000 gallons of water through a complex pumping system. The evening before the scheduled shoot, Kelly developed a severe flu with chills, headache, and the dangerously high temperature. Doctors advised postponing, but with the elaborate water system already installed and the schedule tight, Kelly refused. He spent the day rehearsing in soaking wet clothes, swallowing aspirin between takes to keep his fever manageable. By midnight, after countless repetitions to perfect each splash and swing around the lamppost, Kelly was barely able to stand. His clothes, soaked through for hours, had chilled him to the bone despite the summer heat of the soundstage. The director offered to use his understudy for the wide shots, but Kelly refused. "If I'm going to collapse, at least get it on film," he reportedly told the concerned crew. What audiences see in the finished sequence is a performer pushing through immense physical distress to create an illusion of carefree joy. Each seemingly spontaneous splash and effortless dance step required phenomenal concentration from a man whose body was actively fighting infection. The famous moment where Kelly swings around the lamppost appears weightless on screen. In reality, he was briefly using it for support when dizziness overtook him. After the final cut, Kelly was immediately wrapped in blankets and rushed home. He slept for 18 hours straight, waking to find his temperature had finally broken. When he returned to the studio, there was unexpected news. The footage was pristine, requiring no retakes whatsoever. In later years, Kelly rarely mentioned the illness, preferring to focus on the artistic achievement rather than the physical ordeal behind it. His dedication created one of cinema's most recognizable sequences, immortalizing not just a song, but also a level of professional commitment that defined Hollywood's golden era. The rain that nearly broke him instead made him eternal. Donald O'Connor's Double Take. Make 'Em Laugh, the show-stopping solo number from Singin' in the Rain, nearly killed its performer, twice. Donald O'Connor, tasked with creating a physical comedy masterpiece, approached the sequence with the same no-holds-barred commitment that had made him a vaudeville star since childhood. The routine required O'Connor to flip over sofas, run up walls, and crash through breakaway props in a 3-minute tornado of perpetual motion. Unlike other numbers in the film that were carefully planned over months, director Stanley Donen gave O'Connor just 2 days to choreograph and perform the entire piece. By the end of the first day's filming, O'Connor had completed dozens of takes. The physical toll was immediate. His body was covered in bruises, and he had scraped skin off both elbows and knees from repeated falls. More concerningly, he began coughing uncontrollably between shots. After the final take, O'Connor collapsed on set. Medical examination revealed he was coughing up blood from lungs severely irritated by inhaling wool fibers from the carpets he had been rolling across all day. Additionally, doctors diagnosed extreme physical exhaustion that had pushed his body to the breaking point. O'Connor was ordered to complete bed rest for 3 days. When he returned to the studio, producer Arthur Freed delivered the devastating news. A hair in the camera gate had ruined all the footage. The entire sequence would need to be reshot from scratch. O'Connor's response became Hollywood legend. "Well, I was in the hospital anyway. Might as well consider it rehearsal time." Over the next 2 days, he repeated every bruising pratfall, every bone-jarring collision, every acrobatic stunt, this time with a body already weakened from the first attempt. The physical comedy that appears so effortless on screen represents one of the most punishing performances ever captured on film, a testament to the adage that comedy is hardest when it looks easiest. The flood that drowned 3 extras. Director Michael Curtis's obsession with realism reached its tragic peak during production of 1928's biblical epic Noah's Ark. For the flood sequence, Curtis demanded spectacle on an appropriately divine scale. Hundreds of extras struggling through actual torrents of water, rather than the miniature models other directors might have employed. Warner Brothers constructed enormous tanks above the set, capable of holding 600,000 gallons of water. Curtis insisted these be filled to capacity, brushing aside safety concerns from his technical crew. More disturbingly, he deliberately chose not to warn many of the extras about the volume of water that would be released, believing their genuine panic would enhance the scene's realism. When cameras rolled, Curtis gave the signal and opened the floodgates without rehearsal. The biblical deluge that followed was more catastrophic than even he had anticipated. The immense water pressure snapped wooden scaffolding like twigs. Extras, who had been told to simply act frightened, found themselves fighting for their lives as the torrent swept them against support beams and electrical equipment. Many were pinned underwater by broken set pieces or tangled in cables. The screams captured on film were not acting, but genuine terror. When the water finally subsided, the human toll became apparent. 3 extras had drowned. Another had a leg so severely crushed it required amputation, and dozens more suffered broken bones and near-drowning injuries. In the aftermath, investigations revealed Curtis had bypassed numerous safety protocols in his pursuit of authenticity. Legal battles continued for years as injured extras sought compensation. Most shocking to modern sensibilities was the studio's decision. The footage, devastating as its creation had been, remained in the final cut. Curtis justified this choice with cold calculus. It was too expensive to reshoot. The Noah's Ark tragedy eventually led to stronger safety regulations and stunt performer protections. But for 3 families, these changes came too late. Their loved ones had literally died for a scene that moviegoers would watch with no knowledge of its true cost. If these stories left you gripping your seat, imagine the legends we haven't uncovered yet. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you're first in line for our next deep dive into Hollywood's hidden history. Smash like if you believe every stunt performer's tale deserves the spotlight, and share this video with a movie lover who thinks the classics were all glamour and no grit. Thanks for watching, and keep the film rolling.